Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. I've taken some time just to work around my house, do things I've been putting off. My kids just went back to school today, so it's been nice having them home. And I'm not one of those parents that love it when they go back to school, so it was a little quiet today, but I got a lot of work done and a new episode ready. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like the video, share it with your friends. If you want updates of when I post new content, you can hit that bell notification and it'll let you know. Appreciate you guys. Music fact of the day is more of a recommendation. I've been spending some time in the evenings watching some good music documentaries. Found this gem on Amazon Prime. It's Tom Petty, Somewhere You Feel Free. The Making of Wildflowers. It comes from video that was actually found after he passed, I believe, where they had filmed him from 1994 to 1995. That's when he was leaving the Heartbreakers and recording Wildflowers. Such a great inside look into a genius. And I have to say, he seems like such a cool dude. I never got to see Tom Petty in concert, and it makes me sad. So some interesting news for you guys that's had my gears turning all day. I think it was a wrong number, but on January 2nd, I got a voicemail that I just found today because I stink at checking voicemail, text messages, inboxes. And if you've sent one, you know this. But on January 2nd, I got a call from an inmate in a Florida correctional facility. The message was cut off at the very beginning, but I'm going to play what I have now on the microphone. I hope you guys can hear it. When my contact in California calls me, it cuts those off too. So I don't get the full message of like what we've heard on the jail calls when you pick up. But this is the message. Here we go.
The correctional facility, freeway or call waiting is not allowed and may automatically disconnect this call. This call is also subject to being recorded or monitored, except for privileged communications between attorney and client.
My theory is it was a wrong number. I posted it today because it's a little ironic. Everybody was like, Charlie's calling. I doubt it. I think probably a wrong number. I don't know anybody in the Florida DOC, so who knows? But I did put the number on VIPs because that way, if I'm on Do Not Disturb, which I keep my phone on all day long, it'll ring through because color me curious. Also, Charlie has filed his notice of appeal that was e-filed on December 31st at 9:02 p.m. It says notice of appeal. Notice is hereby given that the defendant, Charles Adelson, appeals to the First District Court of Appeals the order of the court rendered on December 12th, 2023. The nature of the order is a final order of judgment and sentence in a criminal case. In parentheses, it says jury trial. If you've been listening to the jail calls on my YouTube, you know that Charlie told his parents that his attorney basically said, don't break the bank, hiring an appeal attorney. And even Charlie told multiple people he knew his chances of a successful appeal were pretty much slim to none, but we will keep an eye on it and see what happens with that. I've been looking back over the years of the coverage of the trials, and I found a very interesting statement by Charlie Adelson's attorney after the joint trial with Sigfredo Garcia and Katie Magbanawa. His attorney, David Oscar Marcus, had this to say about the outcome of that trial. Remember, Katie's case ended in a hung jury. She was retried, ultimately convicted. But here's what he had to say after that first trial. My first reaction is that I hope the Markel family feels some sense of justice and relief that Garcia was convicted. The trial must have been so hard and taxing on them. My second reaction is that the prosecution couldn't prove its theory on Katie after 3 years of really thorough investigation and preparation. This is why they have not charged Charlie and his family. The case simply isn't there. We don't charge people based on podcast and internet speculation. The prosecution rightfully understood that it couldn't prove a case against Charlie before this trial. After the hung jury, its prospects have gone down and not up. File that one under statements that did not age well. So let's get started breaking down these testimonies. It's going to take 2 episodes. I've got 36 pages of notes on the 3 different trials that she's testified at so far. At the joint trial, the very first trial, the defense has Wendi on cross and they have her explain immunity. The defense attorney says anything you say today can't be used against you if the state decides to arrest you later. Well, Wendi smiles and laughs and says the state isn't going to decide to arrest me. I mean, the jury's still out on that one, but we'll see if that holds up. One thing I do want to play for you guys, and this is about 10 minutes, but this is interesting. Wendi is on cross-exam at that first trial. One thing I want to play for you guys is a video from Katie Magbanawaz's retrial. The defense attorney on cross did not hold back any punches with Wendi, and it got her rattled. If you're on YouTube, you can watch the video, but I think the audio is good enough for everybody to listen. Let's go ahead and play that now.
And you made the decision, I'm not going to look at any of this stuff.
Correct.
I don't want to know what happened to the father of my 2 children.
Not I don't want to know what happened.
How can you say you love those boys if you don't care who killed the father that they loved?
Of course I care who killed the father that they loved.
Then why won't you look at the stuff?
I've been advised not to.
Are you afraid that when you look at it, you're going to realize that your brother did this?
I am not afraid of that.
Now, of course, you've, and we won't get into privileged communications, but you've spoken to your lawyer about the case.
How are we not getting into privileged communications? Yes, I've spoken to my lawyer about the case.
You're very intelligent. You have one of the top defense attorneys in the country, a former federal prosecutor, John Lohr, right there in the blue suit, right?
He is my attorney.
You're telling me with all of this at your disposal, your intelligence, his experience, and all this information, that you don't care to find out who it is that killed Professor Markel?
This is not that I don't care to find out. My job is to take care of those boys, and that is what I do. I don't see how it helps take care of them to go reading and watching and soaking up all of the horrible information that's out there.
You don't realize that you could be helpful in finally untangling this to give this jury the truth about what happened to Professor Markel?
I have been nothing but helpful since this started.
To what happened to their son? By you looking at it, you are at the center of all this, but you won't look at anything to help in the process.
I've done nothing but help in this process.
You came here and testified.
I came here and testified. I spoke to the police for 6 hours without anyone present. I signed over my cell phone, my car, my house, everything, my computer. What else do I have or know that you haven't seen?
You came here because you were subpoenaed and had no choice.
Correct.
Right?
This is not fun. I would not do this by choice.
You've been inconvenienced.
I've not been inconvenienced.
Professor Markel was shot in the head.
I'm not complaining about being here. This is my duty. I'm here.
We'll get back to you complaining about being here. Do you honestly expect this jury to believe that you haven't confronted your brother about all of this?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you did confront him?
Yes, I do expect them to believe that I did not confront my brother because I didn't.
Or maybe you don't need to because you know the truth in this case. You already know it. That he went behind your back, right?
Did not happen.
Just like he has done with past boyfriends. He's done that in the past where he's gone behind your back when you were having problems in a relationship and dealt with it himself.
No.
Miss Adelson, you understand that until you expose your brother what he did, that everybody's going to consider you as guilty. You understand that, right?
What is the question that you're asking me?
You understand that until you expose your brother and explain what he did, that he went behind everybody's back, that he hired a hitman to murder your ex-husband, you'll remain guilty in the eyes of the world.
I can't speak to the eyes of the world. I can only know that I have done nothing wrong.
Or maybe you are guilty.
I am not guilty.
So, a witness in this case, and I'm not going to get into their testimony, but one of the hitmen, the convicted hitman, implicates you. On July 17, 2014, the day before the murder, the morning before, He says that you were walking on Trescott with the two boys, that you walked down the driveway and into the house.
That never happened.
Right, because Professor Markel, I apologize, Professor Markel, he had the kids. Based on the way that your guy's schedule was, on that day he would have had the children in the morning, and you're going through such a bad divorce, you wouldn't be at his house, right?
I wouldn't be at his house anyway, but not because we were going through a bad divorce. At that time, things were pretty copacetic.
All right, so we're coming back to maybe you do know, or maybe you were involved.
Excuse me? What's the question that you're asking me?
I'm giving you a header of what we're talking about so that it will ease you in the question, okay? I'm just telling you what the topic that we're on, so we'll get to a question. Now, the government asked you about a time that you met Miss Magbanua. It was actually spring break of March 2014, right?
I believe so.
You went down to Miami. You stayed with your brother, Charles.
I went down to Fort Lauderdale after being in Immokalee and stayed with my brother. You
then went to Miami Beach to Yardbird and had dinner outside with your boyfriend at the time, or who you were dating, Jeffrey Lacasse. Catherine McBanwell was there, and your brother Charles Adelson, and you all ate outside, right?
We did.
And that's on Miami Beach, not in Fort Lauderdale.
Correct.
Now, just for context, Jeffrey Lacasse, he was also an FSU professor, not at the law school, but an FSU professor. Nice guy, right?
I don't think so now.
Now, you deny, I'm assuming, that on July 13, 2014, you told Jeffrey Lacasse that Charles looked into hiring a hitman. You deny that, or you admit that?
I deny that.
And that you told him that Charles looked into hiring a hitman back in September of 2013.
That never happened.
Which would have been months before your brother even met Catherine McBanwell.
I don't remember when they met.
Letting you know the topic we're on, we're talking about you being involved. That same week, earlier in the week, you sent an email. We're talking about the week of the murder now, not spring break, the week of the murder, not Yardbird, the week of the murder. You sent an email to Jeffrey Lacasse saying that you wanted to break up, that you needed space, right?
I did.
Sent him a long email. Stay away. We're broken up. Right?
I did.
You knew that on July 18, 2014, Jeffrey Lacasse was leaving town to go on a trip, right?
I knew he was leaving at some point that week. I don't remember when.
You knew that he was leaving on the same day of the murder at the same exact time as the murder.
I don't think I did.
11 a.m. on July 18, 2014.
I don't think I knew when he was leaving town.
It's a good way to put the blame onto somebody else. You'd agree on that, right? If it happened, it would have been a good way to put the blame on somebody else.
I have no idea when he was going to leave town.
Your interview, July 18, 2014, you said, my brother, he joked about hiring a hitman. Perhaps that was you just planting a seed to divert the attention of law enforcement away from you.
It was not.
Let's jump off topic right now and talk about your boys' names. That in the time after the murder, you changed their last names from Markel to Adelson, right?
A year later, yes.
Why?
I was scared.
Of what?
Of someone coming to attack them.
So it's a year later, you won't look at anything because you don't want to know what's going on in the case. And the thought is, well, they're going to be protected if they have my last name and not Markel, right?
Yes.
Now, years later, arrests are made. It's clear who committed the murder, Sigfredo Garcia, Luis Rivera. The Adelson name has been dragged through the mud. Why haven't you continued to protect your boys and changed the name back?
I will be changing I'm not going to change the name back. I don't think that will help. One day I'll change all of our names.
The government asked you about immunity, so let's get into that. You explained that as an attorney, you understand that when the government gives a subpoena for somebody to testify, that it conveys immunity, right?
That's my understanding. My knowledge of criminal law dates back to 2003 when I took a semester in law school, so forgive me.
Graduated law school, right?
This isn't my area of law.
When you clerked on the 11th Circuit, it was with Judge Jordan, right?
I did immigration appeals.
Yeah, but you still dealt with criminal stuff as well, too.
Very little.
So your understanding, though, is it doesn't mean they can't arrest you. They just can't use what you say here against you later on. So you're protected.
Correct.
And you needed that to testify, right?
It's just given to testify. It's not a question of whether I needed it. It comes with testifying.
You fear being charged by them, so you need to have that protection of
I
your words.
don't fear being charged for a crime I didn't commit, no.
Now, y'all had this nice exchange where it was pleasant, but there's actually tension between you and this office, right?
No.
They recently had your brother Charles Adelson arrested, and he's in custody, right?
Correct.
For first-degree murder.
Correct.
And there's no tension?
It's very uncomfortable to be here. It's hard to tell where the tension is coming from.
They've discussed your involvement in this case. They insinuated it on the direct examination. There's no tension?
Lots of media insinuates that I did something I didn't do too. I can't feel tension towards every person in the world.
That's funny. I thought you didn't look at anything.
I don't. That's why.
But you know that you know about the media, but you don't know about the media?
I know about the media because it keeps me from employment. It keeps me from lots of things in my life. I'm aware of what's there, but I don't read the minutia so I can sleep at night.
Ms. Adelson, 5 minutes ago you said you don't look at any of that stuff.
I
Now
don't
I asked you a
look at
question.
it.
Let me finish.
Sure.
5 minutes ago you say you don't look at any of that stuff. Now I ask you a question, you say you look at stuff.
That's not actually what I said. I said I'm aware that it exists, but I don't read it. I don't listen to it.
Then how do you know that they're bashing you?
You just told me they are.
I did?
Yeah.
How about this? We'll come back to it. You can think up a better answer, okay?
I'm not thinking up an answer. I'm telling you the truth. I'm sorry if you don't want to listen to it.
Your basic understanding of criminal law, though, you know that if the defense gives you a subpoena, you get no immunity.
Correct.
Correction, improper question.
I'm not going beyond that question.
All right, that's the only question you can ask on that.
If I give you a subpoena, you don't get immunity, right?
Correct.
Now, let's talk about your parents. The government asked you about your mother and father, Donna and Harvey, right? The government could do the same and subpoena them so that this jury can watch them get questioned, not nicely how Ms. Kaplan questioned you, but to be cross-examined by me.
Objection, improper question.
I'm going to sustain that. Ask a different question.
Are your parents here in Tallahassee right now?
No.
Are they back in Miami?
Yes.
Do they have any plans of coming here this week or next?
I don't think so.
So that got pretty heated, and we're going to play some more on the next episode about this. So the way I'm doing this is I'm going to identify, was this said at the joint trial, the retrial, or Charlie's trial? That way we know which trial we're talking about when we're referencing certain statements. I was rewatching Wendy's police interview from the day Dan was shot. And one thing that kind of stuck out to me is when she asked the victim's advocate, when Dan was shot, did someone call police because they heard a gunshot or something? Did Dan call the police? How would they know to take him to the hospital? Just weird to kind of ask that. That's kind of the last thing that would be on my mind, but different strokes for different folks, right? At Katie's retrial, they talk about Wendy's interview where she mentions that it's possible a family member could be involved on her behalf. Remember, when she calls Donna afterwards, she talks to the victim's advocate and said she was relieved to hear that her mom was surprised or something to that effect. They ask, you suspect that your family was involved? Wendy says, no, I did not suspect my family was involved. Prosecutor Kappelman, did you mention in your interview with law enforcement that you suspected that your family could be behind this? And Wendy said, I think I speculated about lots of things during the 6 hours I spent with law enforcement without an attorney present, trying to help them solve this murder. Kappelman said of the things you said, one was that your family very much disliked him and that you thought it was possible that someone had done this on your behalf unbeknownst to you. Wendy said, I did say I thought someone might have done this on my behalf. Kappelman says, who did your brother know that had connections that could get something like that done? Wendy says, I have no idea. Kappelman says, do you know Katie? Wendy says, I've met Katie twice. Wendy said she knew Katie was on the payroll for the Adelson Institute since Katie worked there. She could not recall what Katie's job was, though. Again, at Katie's retrial, Kappelman asked Wendy if she wants the culpable parties in this murder to be held accountable. Wendy says, absolutely. Kappelman says, even if it involves your own family, and Wendy says, absolutely, followed by a really big gulp. You see her throat move. Kappelman says, do you recall giving an interview with law enforcement on the day that your ex-husband was murdered? Wendi says, I recall sitting with law enforcement for 6 hours. Yes, I recall. And did you tell law enforcement something different in that interview about the culpability of your family? Wendi said, I'm sure while I sat for 6 hours, completely traumatized, that I said all kinds of things. The prosecutor says, all right, well, one of the things you said while you sat for 6 hours, completely traumatized, is that you wanted the culpable parties held accountable unless it was your family. Wendi said, I don't believe I phrased it like that. And I think you're taking my words out of context. The prosecutor says, no further questions. I'm going to tell you guys, Kappelman is a boss lady. She knows how to throw some major shade. And it's very subtle. But FYI, just in the police interview the day was shot, Wendi says, someone tried to kill my ex-husband. They should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The investigator says, regardless of who it is. And Wendi says, I mean, it would be different if I thought it was my brother, but I don't think it was my family. Anyone outside my immediate family, that's a tough one. I don't think my immediate family did this. So if it's anybody else, yeah. The investigator says, do you think Charlie would be capable of doing something like this? Wendi said no, he's just a joker. Now, at the joint trial, their boys are 8 and 10. She said Donna at that point wasn't working very much, but she did help at the dentistry practice some. So let's go over some of her statements about the family's feelings about Dan. At the joint trial, Wendi says, do you want to specify a point in time? Prosecutor Kappelman says, well, in your interview at the police station, you said your parents were very angry with him. Wendi says at that point in time during the divorce, she thinks they were angry with him. They felt he treated her badly. She said Charlie would listen to her about things she was upset about at the time with the divorce going on. So whether he liked him or didn't, he was supportive of me, but he never expressed that he disliked Dan. Later in testimony in this same trial, she says he probably didn't like Dan, but I also think he didn't spend a lot of time thinking about him. She thinks overall they got along fine. At Charlie's trial, on the same subject, their feelings about Dan, she said her parents were very angry with Dan, but would never say a bad word about him in front of the kids. Prosecutor Kappelman has her flip through the transcript from the police station from the day Dan was shot. Wendi said, you know, it's like my parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else. Wendi said, that is what I said. And that's because I was saying that in the context of talking to law enforcement for hours and hours and trying to help them figure out who might be responsible. Kappelman says, and who did you tell them might be responsible? She said, well, I told them it could be many people, a student, his current girlfriend. I mentioned lots. And Kappelman says, and out of the lots of people, your family was one? And then Wendi says yes. So Kappelman goes for the jugular and says, that's what happened, right? Wendi says, I don't understand. Kappelman says, your family had your ex-husband killed to try and help you. Now, Wendi looks nervous as all get out and says, no, that's completely untrue. So moving on to the topic of her parents' wealth. At the joint trial, Prosecutor Kappelman asks if her family's wealthy. Wendi says, are you asking me to speculate? It depends on how you define wealthy. When Kappelman asks, are they millionaires? And Wendi says no. At Katie's retrial, Wendi says between 2013 and 2016, the business was doing very well. But at that point, the social media barrage had happened. Kappelman says, you're referring to this case? And Wendi says, absolutely. Kappelman says, but prior to the murder, the Adelson Institute was profiting around $2 million a year. Wendi said she had no idea what it was earning. Kappelman asked Wendi if her parents had other investments aside from the dentistry business, and Wendi says, I don't know. Kappelman said, did you know they own properties? Wendi says she knows now they own properties, but she didn't know then, and she doesn't know when they acquired the properties. At Charlie's trial, she's asked the same question about her parents' wealth, and she said they worked hard to support them and the business did well for a period of time. She said around $3 to $6 million in profit each year between 2013 to 2016 sounds about right when that figure was offered by Prosecutor Kappelman. So you see, it's not like that's anything that's huge. How do you not know your parents own property? This family was very fluid. Moving on to religion as a reason for the divorce with Dan. At the joint trial, the prosecutor asked if how they would raise their boys in their faith contributed to that separation. Wendi says yes. They had different ways of practicing their faith. At Katie's retrial, she said that was part of it, but not really the central decision. It was more of their relationship overall. When pressed, she said that Dan wanted to keep the boys kosher. She didn't practice being kosher. She said it's not like it wasn't important to her, but it began to supersede things like love and trust. Wendy's asked if a kosher diet seemed impractical for her, and she gives an example of where she went to a picnic with a client of hers, and their oldest son had pizza, and Dan was really upset about that. At Charlie's trial, she said at the time of their marriage, Dan was not as observant or as religious, that it happened over time. At the joint trial, we talk about filing for divorce. She filed on December 10th, 2012. Wendi is asked if she moved to Miami in the fall of 2012, and she says no. She's asked if it was her desire to move to South Florida, and Wendi said right then it was not. Prosecutor Kappelman asks if she's familiar with a court order that ordered her to come back from South Florida, and Wendi says no. Wendi ended up and moved to another home in Tallahassee and says she eventually wanted to move back to Miami. She said her parents were also supportive of her wanting to move back. That divorce was finalized July 31st, 2013. When asked if she considered her divorce nasty, she says, I think most divorces aren't very pleasant. Kappelman says, but this one was really unpleasant, right? And Wendi said she found divorce to be really unpleasant. Kappelman says, but you guys argued over things as small as a tennis racket. Wendi does not remember. In the end, they had 2 8-hour mediations with no resolution. But right before this went to trial, they did come to an agreement. So let's move on to overprotective parents. What does she say about her parents? At the joint trial, Kappelman asks if she would describe her parents as being over-involved in her personal business. Wendi asked as compared to other people's parents. Ultimately, she said she didn't know. At Katie's retrial, she said Donna was being a bit over-involved as far as following the divorce proceedings. And when asked if Donna was over-invested in her personal life, Wendi shakes her head and says yes. She's one of those moms, yes. Later in the testimony, she says, I think my mom is and was very invested in my life, but I don't think of her as a controlling person. Moving on to Charlie's trial, she said her mom is overprotective of her, and she said she isn't controlling, but definitely overprotective. When asked if Donna ever tried to micromanage her life, she said maybe, yeah. The financial impact of the divorce to the Adelsons. They refer to Donna's email to Wendi on May 3rd. Both the disappearance of your mother from the position of office manager and the disappearance of your father from the practice for a significant amount of time has caused a decrease in the practice income and the loss of some patients who feel it's either not being run in the same way when my mother was there full time, or that my father is unable to see patients with problems and has referred them to other offices during his absences. Additionally, this loss of income affects my family because my older brother, also a dentist, purchased the practice from my father in mid-July 2012. He has a monthly payment to make to my father based on the sale of the practice. It isn't fair for him to have decreasing monthly income statements from the practice due to my parents spending so much time in Tallahassee. My brother is unmarried and is a wonderful uncle to Benjamin and Lincoln. If I'm able to relocate to South Florida, they will have an incredibly warm and loving family as an integral part of their lives, not an occasional 2-day weekend trip to visit. Reminder, Donna wrote that email as suggestions of what Wendi should say in her filing. It goes to show, and we went through those emails, she's unhinged. At Katie's retrial, Wendi says, I don't know. It certainly impacted me financially, but I don't think it was impacting the rest of the family at all. She's asked if her mom retired during her divorce to facilitate spending more time with the boys. Wendi said she did not retire, but she did help during the divorce and helped me with the kids. They were very small. She didn't retire. She worked for my dad, so it was okay if she took a leave of absence here and there. You know, Donna chose to remove herself from Miami to be in Tallahassee, all up in Wendi's business. Moving on to relocation for the joint trial. January 14th of 2013, that's when Wendi filed the motion to relocate to Miami. In the filing, she said Dan was making things difficult for her at her job. At the joint trial, they talked about the relocation, and Dan told her maybe if he could live nearby in Miami and commute to FSU, that might work. He wanted to leave FSU at some point. Wendi said it was a matter of time. But at Katie's retrial, Kappelman asked about the supposed hostile work environment and asked how long she stayed there. She stayed through July of 2014. So 1 year after the divorce, and obviously the month Dan was murdered, she was gone. And at the joint trial, Prosecutor Kappelman asks if that motion was dismissed with prejudice, meaning when it's dismissed with prejudice, you can never bring that back to court. It's a done deal. Judge is not going to change their mind. Wendi says she can't remember if it was dismissed with prejudice. Prosecutor Kappelman asked Wendi if she was disappointed that she couldn't leave Tallahassee. Wendi said she was relieved. She said she was happy at her job. Why file in the first place? It's interesting if you look from January 14th of 2013, when she files that motion and says Dan was making her life difficult at work. But then when it was ruled on, she said she was relieved because she was happy with her job. It's total opposites. At the retrial for Katie on the motion to relocate, Dan filed a 23-page response to Wendi wanting to relocate to Miami with the boys. Prosecutor Kappelman said it's quite verbose. And Wendi said that at some point, Danny fired or alienated his attorneys and started doing his own legal work. Kappelman says it's fair to say he was adamantly opposed to you relocating. And Wendi says, yes, he shared all of that here, which is different than the conversations they had. Kind of convenient. You have the filing where Dan clearly and in very long form expresses his disapproval. Yet she says it's different than the conversations they had. Kappelman says, but that's what he filed. Wendi says, yeah, that's what the judge sanctioned him for. Again, having to throw in something negative about Dan. I noticed that watching these. I noticed it before when I watched Charlie's trial. A lot of times after she says something about Dan, she ends it with a negative. Like that's the last part of the sentence maybe that she wants the jury to remember as something negative. It's just something I've seen as a pattern with her. Kappelman refers Wendi to page 82, and Dan says the sole reason Wendi wanted to relocate was to be near her parents. Wendi said it wasn't the sole reason that she wanted to move. It was absolutely a reason. She said, I wanted to create some stability for my kids and family. Having family around helps have a more stable environment. I was seeking a place that would be stable and permanent for the kids and me. Danny never planned on staying in Tallahassee. It was just a question of time before he moved to New York to be with his girlfriend. He had dreams of being at Harvard, so Tallahassee was just a temporary stopping point. I wanted a place that was permanent for us where we had family support. And because I work in immigration, there were a lot of career opportunities for me there. The prosecutor asked if it was her most non-negotiable term. That refers back to Donna's emails. Wendi says no. Prosecutor Kappelman says, but it was very important to you. And Wendi said, I wouldn't say it was very important to me. Kappelman says, well, was it very important to your mother? Wendi says she was much more looking forward to having her daughter and her grandchildren home. Later on in Katie's retrial during testimony, Kappelman asked Wendi if in general, relocation was the most important thing to Donna regarding the divorce. Wendi said it was probably for her to be safe and to be in a stable situation with her sons. The prosecutor asked Wendi to read that email from Donna where she writes that the relocation is non-negotiable. Kappelman points out that Donna was very unhappy with Dan and despised him. Wendi says she can't speak to whether or not Donna despised Dan or didn't, but she was very, very disappointed with the way he treated me. Later, she's asked how her mom reacted to the news that she wouldn't be able to relocate, and Wendi said her mom was very upset. At Charlie's trial, Prosecutor Kappelman quotes from the filing by Wendi, where she said she wanted to relocate to give the kids a better quality of life by increasing their access to close family and providing more consistency and stability. She asked Wendi if being near her parents was the sole reason she wanted to relocate, and Wendi says no. Kappelman's like, turn to page 82 in the filing. And it says the sole reason stated the wife seeks to relocate is so she can be closer to her parents. Kappelman says it wasn't the sole reason stated in your petition. Wendi said it wasn't the sole reason stated in my petition, and it wasn't the sole reason Dan and I talked about before I filed the motion to relocate. Kappelman asked them, why is Dan so adamant that this was the real reason you wanted to be back in Miami? To be near her parents. Wendi says, I think there's a lot of things in these pleadings that aren't true. Just because it says something doesn't make it true. Kappelman also points out in the filing that Dan accuses Wendi of helping herself to non-marital assets, including money and stocks owned by Dan prior to the marriage, luggage, bicycles, tennis rackets, and family heirlooms that Wendi refused to return or to allow Dan into her home to see what other personal belongings were taken without his permission. Kappelman also brings up that Dan accused Wendi of kidnapping the boys while he was away on business, and there were filings both ways that were venomous. Wendi said she wouldn't agree with that. Kappelman says yours were pleasant, and Wendi says, I'm not saying divorce filings are pleasant, but mine were not venomous. Prosecutor asked if Dan knew that Donna was grinding on the issue of getting Wendi and the boys back to Miami. Wendi says no, he would have had no idea. That would not have been known to Dan. Prosecutor Kappelman asks how her relationship with her family is now. This is Charlie's trial. She says she has a good relationship with her family, and that's always been the case. She said Donna is a dedicated grandmother, spends a lot of time with the boys, and when Dan was killed, they moved back. When Dan was killed and they moved back to South Florida, they were living with her parents, and Wendi says, of course, spent every day together. You know, Donna was in hog heaven. Not so much now, but then, you know, you got to pay for that. Kappelman brings up the Donna emails, and Wendi agrees her mom was very extreme in trying to get her relocated. Talking about calling Dan names, at the joint trial, Kappelman refers to the emails that Donna sent where she refers to Dan as the derogatory name. Wendi said she came up with the name when Dan was being really difficult and causing me a lot of pain. So to make him feel less threatening, that's why she gave him this name. She asked if it was a derogatory name. Wendi says no. Kappelman asks if she called Dan that to his face, and she says no. I called him Danny to his face. The judge then asks Wendi to spell the name out, and Wendi says, I don't know if I ever spelled it out. In the emails, Wendi thinks it's spelled with a J, but you could spell it with a G. So Miss Kappelman's waiting in the wings, and she's like, oh, Miss Adelson, you had Dan's phone number programmed into your phone as that name. She spells out the way Wendi had it stored in her phone. Wendi says that's right. At Katie's retrial, she says she doesn't remember Donna calling Dan names. Kappelman's like, hey, let's refresh your recollection with some emails. Did your mom refer to Dan as a bully, a religious zealot, a jackass, a religious extremist? Wendy's like, yep. Kappelman brings up the nickname she gave Dan, and Wendi said it wasn't a bad name, a silly name I came up with during a period of time where I felt incredibly terrorized by Danny, and it was a word I used to make him seem less scary. It was a way to take steam out of a situation I found scary. Bribing Dan to let the kids move to Miami for $1 million. At the joint trial, she says she's sure she knew about it at the time, and then she had her memory refreshed recently. She said she never actually made the offer to Dan. At Katie's retrial, Kappelman asked Wendi if Donna suggested bribing Dan financially to allow that relocation. Wendi says yes, but she doesn't remember the amount Donna suggested. Kappelman's like, let me just find that email. And then she asked Wendi again. Wendi said they would go as high as $1 million with her parents, and Charlie, all three paying an equal share of $333,000 apiece to get a dad to give up his boys. Not going to work in Dan Markel's world. Moving on to the motion filed by Dan to allow Donna to only have supervised visits with the boys. Dan alleged specific occasions he used in his motion for supervised visits between Donna and the boys. The boys informed Dan that Grandma says you're stupid. When Dad asked why she would say that, the children replied in unison, it's because you're trying to take her sunshines away from her. Just want to throw in here, I found Wendy's old apartment in Miami Beach. This was probably the apartment she settled in for a while. What I'm assuming to be the boys' rooms, it was on like Realtor Zillow. There are 2 photos above the bed. You are my sunshine. I'll try to find that picture again and post it. You have to wonder, did Grandma Donna buy that for her sunshines? And then in December of 2013, Lincoln told Dad when they were visiting with Donna, Grandma says she hates you. Dan put in the filing he was concerned about these comments building the foundation for parental alienation, which to me is such a cruel form of child abuse. You do that to your kids, you are not parenting. You allow somebody to do that to your kids, that stinks. You are making a kid choose sides, and these are little kids. I'm not saying that this came from Wendi. We know this came from Donna. But for Donna to love these boys so much that allegedly she would work with her son to have their father killed, she really didn't mind screwing their minds up and making them feel torn or having to listen to bad things about their dad come out of her mouth. It's a pet peeve of mine. Get it together. On March 16th, 2014, Dan filed a motion for only supervised visits with Donna. She asked Wendi again if the order asked to restrict Donna to supervised visits. Wendi says she doesn't remember. Kappelman asked if she remembers the allegations in the filing that Grandma says you're stupid. Your father is trying to take my sunshines away, anything like that. And Wendi said she doesn't remember, but she's happy to look at the motion. The prosecution points out that the motion to limit Donna, it was pending, of course, at the time of Dan's murder. Wendi says that's possible, but she also said that she doesn't think anybody took the motion seriously. When asked if Donna took it seriously, she said she didn't think so. Did Dan take it seriously? Wendi said, I don't know if he wrote the motion. He was probably taking it seriously. Now, at Charlie's trial, Prosecutor Kappelman asked Wendi about that motion by Dan for supervised visits. Wendi said Donna never saw that motion because after he filed that, he asked Donna and Harvey to babysit the kids, and Donna baked him banana bread and gave him a hug goodbye. There was nothing truthful about that pleading, according to Wendi. Wendi said she thinks the reason that he filed it was that he was angry at her for leaving him. She said Dan really didn't want to limit the visitation with the boys. He asked Donna to babysit after that, and Kappelman says, as evidenced by the banana bread. Y'all, coffee through my nose. Now, at the joint trial, Kappelman asked if Donna was worried about the motion. Wendi says no. My mom never knew about this, and as I mentioned before, Dan asked my mom to babysit after the filing, so I really don't believe anything that's written here. Kappelman says, well, you forwarded this motion to your mother. Wendi says, I don't believe I did. And Kappelman says, in fact, you forwarded this motion to 12 different people. Your mom, Jeff Lacasse, Robert Adelson, and others. So if you weren't worried about this, why would you send it to all these people? Wendy's like, I really couldn't say. It's been a long time. At Katie's retrial, it's brought up again. Wendi says nobody took it seriously at the time. It didn't lodge into her memory. She said her mom didn't take it seriously, and she's asked if it was ever ruled on, of course. And Wendi says, I don't know. And Kappelman's like, it was scheduled to be ruled on in August of 2014, the month after Dan was shot. Dan also said Wendi was denying him physical access to the boys. Wendi said that was from a lack of Skyping, and she said it's hard to Skype with two toddlers. He also introduced in the motion that she was allowing the kids to eat non-kosher foods. Wendi said that Dan was upset about that in general, but she doesn't remember that in the filing. But at Katie's retrial, Kappelman mentions that Dan put in his motions that Wendi was failing to communicate about parenting decisions such as the kids' schooling, their diet, extracurricular activities, and things of that nature. They talk about these different things that he put in the filing, and Wendi says Dan made a lot of allegations that weren't true. So I need to look through to figure out which ones we're talking about. Wendi also doesn't remember arguing about the tennis racket. At Katie's retrial, Kappelman asked if they fought over the tennis racket. Wendi says, I imagine it could have been. So we're going to end this on some questions to Wendi about Charlie over the course of these trials. At the joint trial, she's asked about Charlie's business practices, and Wendi says, I know he does implant surgery. She says she has no idea if he offers discounts for cash payments or if he does a lot of business in cash. She also says she doesn't know about a safe at her parents' house with stacks of cash in it. And the prosecutor asks if she has a stack of cash in the safe herself, and she laughs and says no. She said Charlie never talked about hiring a hitman to kill Dan. She admits he made the joke that it was cheaper to buy her the TV as opposed to hiring a hitman. He tended to repeat himself. You ain't lying, Wendi. Okay, I'm going to agree with you on that. He would sometimes make jokes that weren't very funny about all kinds of things. She admits he bought that TV. That was the same one being repaired the morning Dan was shot. She said she made the appointment, and Prosecutor Kappelman asks, did your mom make that appointment? And Wendi says, I don't think so. Kappelman says the repairman was at your house from 8:30 to 9:15. Wendi says the window of that was 8 to noon. The repairman arrived on the early side. Wendi denies Charlie said he had explored all options to take care of the problem being Dan. She's asked about that celebration dinner with Charlie after the murder. Remember, Jeff Lacasse is the one that told investigators about this in one of his police interviews. The prosecution points out Wendi vomited all over the table at this dinner. Wendi said after Dan's murder, she was terrified someone would come after her or the boys, and she didn't leave her house for about a month. When she did, she told Charlie she wanted to go to a restaurant, and she said she had barely eaten for a month out of grief and shock. When she finally went out to eat for the first time, it took a while to get them seated, so she had a pretty strong alcoholic beverage. Therefore, it made a reappearance at the table. Wendi said it was not a celebration. She never heard Charlie refer to it as that. Later in the joint trial, Sergeant Corey Hell from the Tallahassee PD verified some messages sent that night of the dinner. At 6:44 p.m., Charlie to Donna, tell Wendi I will text her when I'm on my way. ETA 8:20, I'm taking her to Lincoln Road. Donna replies, I just told her, where are you? He said, I'm in Pines. ETA is 8:15. Wendi texts Charlie, text when I should come downstairs to wait for you. Should I come downstairs? Charlie texts someone, yes, almost vacation time for me. I'm taking my sister out to dinner tonight. At 10:48 p.m., Donna texts Charlie, someone has a smile going on. That's a pleasure to see. Thank you, Charlie. Charlie texts back, give Wendi lots of Gatorade, water, and Advil. Wendi said she had met Katie before, once at dinner. Then they went to the beach once with Katie and a friend for a few hours. That was on June 15th of 2014. So, I mean, just right before Dan's murder. The photo was taken when Wendi went to Miami to celebrate Father's Day. She doesn't know when Katie and Charlie stopped and started seeing each other. She said she had met many, many, many girlfriends over the years. She didn't get any indication that his relationship with Katie was serious. Charlie was 43 at the time of this trial and had never been married, but we know has a son. This is the joint trial. She has no idea if Charlie gave gifts to other girlfriends. At Katie's retrial, they talk about connections between Charlie and gang members. Of course, Wendi doesn't know of any connections. They talk about Charlie using marijuana. Wendi said he did use marijuana. She doesn't know of anything else. There was something asked about steroids, and she had no knowledge of that. She asked if Charlie was a recreational user or a drug dealer. Wendi says recreational. Prosecutor asked if he used it daily or just occasionally. Wendi says, I don't know how often. If it was every day, she doesn't know, but I do know the pain of the last few years has led him to do some self-medicating. Kappelman says she's referring to 2013, 2014. Wendi says, I don't know if he was using drugs during that time, but she knows he did subsequent to the incidents we're here for today. And Wendi says that's about right. It's not like any of these things are just earth-shattering things, but I think it shows a little bit of a pattern. You could chalk it up to she has had time to refresh her recollection with things she's been shown by the state revolving around the case and the trials. Maybe, but here's the biggest thing out of all this that is such a glaring lie. I'm just saying, from my perspective, this is only my opinion, to try to convince that jury that it did not matter to Donna and she was not worried about Dan asking for only supervised visits. I'll never believe it. You know how obsessed Donna was with those kids. That thought alone, that she may not have time with those boys unless there isn't another adult present, usually one designated by the court, you know, she was clutching her pearls. And I really do think that motion not being ruled on, if you remember, Katie Magbanawa at her trial said that around June, July, it got to be an emergency. Well, that motion was going to be ruled on in August. Just a theory I have, but it really lends itself to motive, I think, on top of just the relocation. But that was kind of insult to injury. You can't relocate. And by the way, if you come up to Tallahassee to see your grandkids, we're going to have somebody from the court in there with you to make sure you're not poisoning these kids about their dad. That's it for today. I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you tomorrow.